Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting to discuss the final phase 2 scope of work addendum at the Southwood Hospital site at 111 Dedham Street. My name is Jackie Bart. I am with GFI Partners, the owner and developer of this site. We're thrilled to have you on with us this evening. We really appreciate the time that you've put into participating and working with us on this. We're going to give our presentation. I'll kick it off to Bill Buckley in a minute to share a little bit about what's been going on site. I will ask that everyone just mutes themselves for now. After I introduce Bill, he'll give a little update. Bob Bird, our LSP, will share the bulk of our presentation, and then we'll just ask that you hold all questions until the end of his presentation. And you can either enter your question in the chat box at that point, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you so that you can ask your question live. With that said, Bill, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Sure. Thank you, Jackie. And hello to everyone. And thank you again for joining us, especially on a warm summer night here. I think it shows the level of commitment that that people have to this site, and to be sure that that all the appropriate steps are taken as we move forward. My role is just to give an update on, and I'll be brief on some of the activities that have taken place on the site by GFI and by members of our development team. And some of these, I think we originally may have mentioned at the last PIP group meeting, and some have been accomplished and others are still underway. So we have completed our asbestos and hazmat survey of all the buildings, and that includes all the buildings and the piping. So we have we basically understand for the demolition of those structures what it's going to take by way of a removal of asbestos and any other hazardous materials. And with that information, we've gone ahead and we have some quotes. We had a better understanding of what it's going to cost us and how we'd go about demolishing those buildings when that time is appropriate. We have installed security cameras out on the site, and those cameras are connected via cellular to members of our property management staff, and they're being monitored on a regular basis. With that same installation, there's security hardware on some of the doors there that is monitoring anyone potentially entering the building, breaking through the doors, and where those are also being monitored. We're thinking we may even ramp that up a little bit. I will tell you that our property management team is getting quite a few notifications of trespassers on the site, and the majority of those are people walking their dogs or walking through the site and utilizing some of the trails up there. So we'd like to just remind everybody that we don't think it's a site that should be used for walking trails and others. We've placed no trespassing signs up there, and any assistance we can get in that would be appreciated. Property management has also been with the activity of our scientists that have been going out there, both doing our monitoring wells and some of the other things that Bob will update you on. There's been a pretty regular presence there, but also our property management staff has been out there quite a bit. We have a regular protocol now on checking on that site. Bob will update you on some of the work that's happening out there. We're hoping to embark on even some additional work with investigation of the landfill. And as a development team, we also we've been participating in the planning board process, looking at trying to identify appropriate market uses for the site, and working on what type of future zoning needs to be put in place. And as we said, those kind of have to follow similar tracks, so that when we get to understanding exactly what it's going to take to clean up this site, that we understand what a potential development scenario looks like as well. So think that's everything I had on my list. We continue to stay updated with the Metacomet Greenway, and if we can be supportive of that in any fashion, we're trying to stay informed about the progress of that project. But with that, I think I turn it over to Bob now. Is that right?
Correct. All right, thanks, Bill. I just want to briefly just introduce our team. Obviously, you've met Jackie and Bill. I also am joined here by Jesse Arroyo from EnviroTrack, who's a senior project manager and working with me on this project. Also tonight with us is Chris Kovalofsky. He's a senior health physics supervisor with DDES, who is our radiological consultant, and he was extensively involved in the investigation that we did out there a couple of months ago to evaluate at least our first phase of radiological investigation of the wastewater treatment beds, the other components of the wastewater treatment system, and the building. So just quickly in summary, what I'm going to do tonight, since you've all had the phase 2 scope of work for at least a few weeks to review, you're probably very familiar with what's in there. I'm not presenting anything new here in terms of data, so I'll rush through this pretty quickly as just a brief summary, and I really want to dedicate the bulk of the time to your questions and comments and other information you may be able to provide us. I don't think it really does us a lot of good for me to just repeat what we've already published in much more detail. But we know there's 90 acres, 4 parcels, 3 in Norfolk, 1 in Walpole. We have a long history of hospital operation. There's 4 release tracking numbers historically assigned to the subject property. The primary one is 2-3001694, which is what we're conducting the bulk of the work under. Brief history timeline here. In February of 21, 111 Dedham Street Inc. purchased the property. March 8th of 21, the PIP petition was received. March 23rd, PIP designation. March 26th, tier classification, transfer and eligible person certification. June 9th, draft PIP plan and PIP meeting. October 1st was a site visit and radiological screening report from the Department of Public Health and Jack Priest, who is the director there. November 29th, 2021, final PIP plan. December 27th, draft phase 2 scope of work addendum. PIP meeting on February 3rd. Final phase 2 scope of work addendum submitted July 1, 2021. So recent activities we've conducted out there. In January, there was a comprehensive walkthrough by EnviroTrack. We went out there and attempted to locate monitoring wells that were still accessible on the site, evaluated those to determine what was going to be useful, which still had integrity at the surface, which had water, which had oil, so forth. So we found 6 of the wells that we found. We had 22 wells. We found 6 were dry, 6 contained NAPL, which is pure number 6 fuel oil, and 10 were determined to be viable for future sampling. In May of 2022, we went out and evaluated 13 monitoring wells, gauged them, and then 8 were suitable, either had sufficient water or did not have petroleum, and they were subsequently sampled. Also in May of 2022, DDES conducted a radiological survey characterization of the filter beds of the former hospital building, wastewater treatment area structures, and we also collected and submitted samples for radiological evaluation. I know you've probably all seen their very detailed report that was in the phase 2 scope of work. I'm not going to attempt to go through that tonight, but we do have Chris here, and with your questions, he will be happy to answer them, and we can talk further about that if you have questions or concerns. So you've all seen this before. We've got several AOCs, AOC 1 through 7, and I think you're familiar with those. And we've got some additional ones associated with potential building debris, potential fuel oil tanks in the residences and other outbuildings, and then incinerator ash disposal areas, which are still yet to be defined. It's a brief overview figure of the site and where the AOCs are. These, from relative to previous figures, we've sort of defined these a little bit more specifically here. We've got AOC 1, which is an area right here behind the powerhouse building. AOC 2, which is another area where the tanks were located. AOC 3, which is the stream, intermittent stream that runs down along through here, and associated sediments. AOC 4, which is an area that really underlies where the railroad spur used to extend to, and where I think coal and oil were offloaded from railroad cars. AOC 5 is the filter bed structure, and the bulk of the impacted material we found. And AOC 6 is the former landfill. It's just a close-up. And you've probably seen this figure in the phase 2 scope of work that shows it, primarily this sort of pink oval here is based on existing data where we think the fuel oil from the number 6 tank was released to. And that's consistent with where the sort of the piping went into the building and the pipe chase. And because number 6 oil is so thick and viscous, it really needs a warm environment to move readily in the subsurface. And so we are speculating that it moved along the heated pipe chase. Again, more details here, also depicting where we're planning some future investigations, more borings and monitoring wells. So kind of running through the different AOCs. This is AOC number 1, the rear of the power plant. We've got our conceptual site model here that was used to develop sort of our plan for additional investigation. And we had 12 test pits were previously excavated. There was soil removed out here, 325 tons in 1997. There were 9 confirmatory soil samples and post-remediation groundwater sampling. And that information at that time was deemed to be sufficient to close that area, and then it was compliant. And a Class A2 REO was submitted in March of 2000. During the May sampling event, we collected groundwater sample from 1 well in that area that did not have floating oil in it. And it was analyzed for the Mass DEP, EPH, and VPH methodologies and dissolved metals. And everything in the results, all the target analytes were below reporting limits, with the exception of dissolved barium, which was found but below standards. So surprisingly, the groundwater in that area is fairly clean, but that could be consistent with the number 6 fuel oil, which does not readily dissolve in groundwater. So our proposed assessment out there is to do additional soil borings and collect CAM compliant data, which will be needed to support a permanent solution. And based on what we find with these borings and others in the area, we'll extend our investigations till we have the full horizontal vertical extent of contamination identified. AOC number 2, the rear of the engineering building. There were 9 test borings, 3 pits, and 21 monitoring wells were used to characterize AOC 2. There were excavation activities in 97, 98 to 20,000 gallon fuel oil USTs and 1,000 gallon gasoline UST were removed, and approximately 2,220 cubic yards, excuse me, soil were excavated. Excuse me for 1 minute. A total of 11 confirmatory soil samples were collected, and they did indicate exceedances of EPH and PAH standards. And that's why this area still remains an active area of investigation. Fuel oil NAPL number 6 fuel oil remains in selected monitoring wells, but it doesn't appear to be moving anywhere. So during our groundwater sampling event, we were unable to collect samples from monitoring wells associated with AOC2 as NAPL was detected in each well. So groundwater collected from surrounding wells were analyzed for EPH, VPH, dissolved metals, and some were analyzed for VOCs, SVOCs, herbicides, pesticides, PCBs, and PFAS. And all the results were below applicable standards in that area. So proposed assessment, we want to define the area of this NAPL. We're looking into using some in situ screening tools. The issue we may run into there is the geology is very difficult to drill in. These tools are typically operated with a direct push type drilling method as opposed to an auger, and they do encounter some difficulty with what we characterize as the till type soils out there. AOC3, which is the stream sediment, 25 sediment samples were used to initially characterize AOC3. No remediation has been conducted in that area at all. A stage 1 environmental screening was performed in 2002, and based on exceedances of surface water and sediment criteria, a stage 2 ecological risk assessment was recommended. During May, we didn't collect any additional surface water in our sediment samples. We know that this area is going to be something we have to focus on, but right now we want to focus on the other issues, and they will all sort of overlap into this as we look at the extent of NAPL and impacts from the landfill and so forth. So we will, in the not too distant future, engage an ecological risk assessor to review data and start developing a work plan to collect some additional data and evaluate and conduct that stage 2 ecological risk assessment. So AOC5, did I miss something here? Yeah, AOC4, that's evaluated in conjunction with AOC1, contaminated soils at the rear of the power plant. There was soil removed out there. They did achieve an RAO in March of 2000. Again, MW304 results were below reporting limits, with the exception of barium, which was below standards. We do plan to do a couple additional soil borings there to collect updated data and ensure that it's CAM compliant so we can use it in our closure documents. The conceptual site model for the wastewater treatment plant filter beds. So 2 monitoring wells and 5 test pits were initially used to characterize AOC5. An independent study performed by Mass DPH, which identified the presence of radium-226. There was the presence down near the base of the filter beds, near the pump house, and they recommended out of abundance of caution just to install a fence around that material. And a signage went up with a keep out and no trespassing notice. Preliminary investigation was performed by DDES in May of 2022 or 2022, and they concluded that additional sampling of survey units 1, 2, 3, 6, and 13 was necessary to determine the nature and extent of radium-226 in the soil. And I think those are, anybody has questions about this, we can get Chris involved at the end here as we take questions and go into more detail. There are no groundwater monitoring wells currently in the area of AOC5. So we do propose to install additional monitoring wells. I think we've got 7 scheduled in the phase 2 scope of work. And we also have DDES working on a proposal for additional investigation that would focus on defining the horizontal and vertical extent of the radiological material that exceeds the applicable criteria, and helping us kind of develop a remediation plan for those soils. So AOC6 is the landfill. It's kind of the big one, right? 12 monitoring wells and 4 surface soil samples were used to characterize A06 historically. During the May 2022 groundwater sampling event, we collected samples from 4 wells that are in the vicinity, either kind of side gradient or down gradient of the landfill. We analyzed them for a whole host of parameters, including PFAS, which is the per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances that we're all hearing so much about now, and are affectionately known as the forever chemicals. And we also evaluated those samples for radiological materials. Basically, the only thing detected in those samples that exceeded any criteria was PFAS, and that was in 3 of the wells, exceeded the PFAS criteria of 20 parts per trillion for a GW1 area. I think it's important to note that the GW1 area, which is defined as a result of the Zone 2 of the public water supply wells, those are not for the town of Norfolk or town of Walpole public water supply wells. Those are for prison water supply wells, and they have tested the water, and that the water in the prison water supply wells does not exceed any criteria for PFAS. They have very low levels, and they're well below the criteria. So those wells, based on what I've been told, have not been impacted by PFAS. So we're proposing to install some additional wells in that area, and we're also going to do a receptor survey to evaluate private wells. At this time, we're probably not going to sample the wells, but we're going to do additional wells between the landfill and nearby residences, probably installed as overburden and bedrock couplets to evaluate the migration of PFAS in different directions. And then finally, AOC 7, the sump in the basement Kelly building. We'll be evaluating that along with the other areas around the rear of the building for the petroleum. I think our biggest opportunity to investigate that area is going to be when the building comes down and the foundation is pulled out. I think we will have a bird's eye view of exactly what's going on there. But I think it's just been migration along the heated pipe chase, which provided the steam to the building for heat. Other potential areas that we're going to look at. I know we've talked a lot about different areas that might be impacted. We received comments specifically about demolition debris, potential fuel oil underground tanks associated with demolished buildings, and we will do a GPR survey of those areas. Unless we can confirm that there was a connection to the central steam plant. We do have anecdotal evidence that those buildings were connected to the steam plant, but we'll look into that further. And then when we can identify the former incinerator areas and potential incinerator ash disposal areas, will be analyzed for potential radiological materials and likely contaminants. We do have an idea where the incinerators were located, but the ash disposal still remains anecdotal. We were going to install a couple of additional monitoring wells to replace wells ET6 and ET8 to be used as background locations. So again, groundwater monitoring well sampling results. There was we did quite a bit of sampled 8 wells, analyzed for a variety of different parameters, and really the only thing that we found out there that exceeded regulatory criteria was PFAS in wells kind of in the general vicinity of the landfill. So I think that's the good news, is that we're really not seeing a widespread shallow groundwater impact. Now, we will go out and do some additional deeper wells, install couplets. You've probably all seen the Mass DEP's comments on the phase 2, and that was really their most significant comment, was they want to see some couplets installed. Those were certainly things we planned to do, but hadn't really decided on that yet until we were going to get some more shallow results. So we'll install couplets as we move forward in the future investigations here as part of the phase 2. This just provides some detail on the soil borings wells that we're proposing to do and the testing that we would implement at those locations. Kind of schedule for phase 2 activities. We've identified the data gaps, so we're going to be conducting additional investigations over the next year and a half to kind of fill in all of our data gaps, get our risk characterization and human health risk characterization, eco risk characterization going, and then by March 6th of 2024, submit a revised phase 2 comprehensive site investigation. And then each year following that, to March of 2025, phase 3 and phase 4, March of 2026, permanent solution, temporary solution, or remedy operation status. Our PIP schedule here. So we're having this meeting on August 4th, 2022. From the origination of the draft. So on August 21st, 2022 is when PIP comments will be due on the written comments due on the phase 2 scope of work. We will then within 60 days respond to those comments and issue the final phase 2 addendum. And then we're tentatively planning another PIP update roughly 5-6 months from now in December of 2022. So I guess now we'll open it up to questions. We've got our team here, so we'll try to utilize the best resource available to respond to your questions. And thanks.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, Jack, you can look for raised hands or chat comments.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Like Bob mentioned, you can raise your hand here on Zoom if you'd like to ask a question, or you can type one into the chat box, whatever you see fit.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Betsy. Yes.
Hi. Well, naturally, I haven't the faintest idea how to raise a pretty little yellow hand.
That's okay. We're happy to have
But
you.
as long as you can hear me, I just have a question regarding the comments about incinerator ash. And I think it was referred to as being anecdotal, and that you plan to learn more when buildings came down about the incinerator ash. Does that mean you have not found any incinerator ash to this point?
We haven't specifically looked for the incinerator ash yet. I don't think we said that we were going to look for incinerator ash when the buildings came down, but I think during our next course of field work, we will try to coordinate with those of you in the group who may have a better idea where the incinerator ash may have gone. We've sort of anecdotally, we've been told that it was individuals were tasked with taking the ash from the incinerators in wheelbarrows and disposing of it in the woods.
Yes.
But where that occurred, we're really not sure, or there's no specificity to that. So we'll have to just probably start out at the incinerator locations and work our way out and just do a scan of places that appear to have, mounds that look man-made.
Okay, good. I bet it will be found. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Betsy.
Yep.
Thanks, Betsy.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Sandra.
I see something in the chat from Sandra. Question to DDES. 2 other filter beds exist that were not surveyed. Will they be done? What is max data? Not entirely sure what that means.
Chris, if you could respond to that.
Yep.
We discussed that a little bit the other day.
Yeah, not a problem. So the other filter beds that exist, I guess, in the AOC map, were completely overgrown. They have just, forested in essentially. They could not be accessed safely at this current time. We really want to focus on this approach, and our approach in conjunction with the VioTrack being iterative. We're trying to go after, the areas that are identified first and work our way outwards from that. So again, this first round of walkover surveys did not include that because it was not safely accessible for my team. They had steep embankments, lots of overgrowth, poison ivy everywhere. It just was not the place for us to be at this time. Now, with that said, it will certainly be investigated by the end of the project. It's not something we can just miss or forget or, just say it wasn't accessible. We can't check there. It certainly will happen.
And just to clarify, Sandra asked, what is the maximum reading to date?
Let me pull up that data. It was in the report. I will pull that up right now.
Thanks, Chris.
Yes.
While Chris is doing that, I know that there's been comments about there looks like there's a couple of other filter beds that are located along the east side of the access road, not here in the general filter bed area, but over here in the side. And when DDS was out there, their investigation did not identify any piping that ran to those filter beds. So what we're speculating, based on observations at other similar facilities, is that those beds were used for the drying of any material removed or any sediment or sludge removed from the surface here, and they were not part of the actual filtration system per se. They were separate areas and not connected to this system, but they were screened.
Yes. All right. So I am ready with the answer for that.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So our highest reading was just under 20,000 counts per minute. I want to clarify that unit that counts per minute, that is a reading of instrument response. I know how Bob mentioned earlier, we're going to be going back in to actually do some more soil sampling. That's where we're going to get more of a correlation of actual activity. Our instruments do not read in units of quantity of radioactive material. They read out in relative response to gamma rays in the case of the equipment we used here on this project. And now again, that we're going to take that data from the soil analytical to correlate our instrument response. Every type of soil, every type of media is different. So we have rough approximations, estimations, but we can't give a hard and fast concentration in picocuries per gram or milligrams per kilogram, micrograms per kilogram, until we do that actual soil sampling phase.
Thanks, Chris.
So Chris, this is Sandra. Can I just ask one more question?
Of course, I'm here for you.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Bird just said that the filter beds on the other side of the road were not part of the system. And yet some of you found two of them. I guess the third one was not accessible, but two of them had readings more than 2 times the background level.
Yes, ma'am.
So are you saying, just because, I don't know what Bob Bird was saying, was he saying they weren't connected, but they still could contain some of the radium deposits?
Yes, we certainly have detected, material there. It's going to continue to be investigated. What Bob was trying to say is, we don't think it was part of the cascade system. Now, again, this wastewater treatment system with the filter beds made of sand with drains to the next tier, so to speak. If you look on the screen, basically the water came in at the top left at that little trapezoidal, at the culvert, and then to this little trapezoidal guy here. And then from there, it streamed through a series of basins that had sand along the bottom. And every so often, the sand would need to be changed. We speculate that the changing of the sands, they would take to those other 2 pits across the road, what we at DDS called survey units 1 and 2, for a process known as dewatering. So the wet, nasty, sandy material would be taken over to those beds where all the water would essentially drain out. and they would have dry sand that could be either reused or recycled. We don't know what they were doing. This system is antiquated at best. It's not very common. It wasn't used in a lot of places. So it's not like we can go back to the engineering drawings and see exactly what they were doing. But based on the concentrations we found, and that they didn't have piping connecting them to the downhill cascade of the normal system, we're speculating it's a dewatering area.
Okay, as the last row, some of the maximum readings were in that last row and
Yes.
spilled over into the, I guess the wetlands. Are you going to go further to see where else these deposits might have ended up?
Absolutely. Part of our process. Now, the radiological process is driven by something known as MARSSIM. That's MARSSIM. And that's an acronym. That's the Multi-Agency Radiation Site Survey Investigation Manual. And that basically requires us to bound the contamination. Like I said earlier, and I don't want to beat repeat myself too many times, but it's an iterative approach. Once we determine, the vertical, we're going to go after the horizontal extents. And we are required, by regulation to continue until we find the end of the contamination. So regardless of where it goes, we'll be chasing it there.
All right, thank you. I can see that a lot of effort went into preparing this, 647-page report. And we're going to be sending along our comments in writing. But I just wanted to say, some of the data that's been used is over 25 or 20 years old. And I would like to see more monitoring wells in the vicinity of where some of the, unknowns are. I'll put them in writing, but closer to the intermittent stream on the back side of where the power plant is. I don't know if you can go to a different drawing, but yes. Okay, so you have a new well that's actually on the other side, that one. And then, but there is none, as you see southwesterly of the engineering. Nope, that would be the power building. So over where your cursor was, go down. And just to the left of that. So in this area, closer to the intermittent stream, there's no new wells there. Right.
Correct.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't want to do some more research there?
Well, I think we'll see where the data takes us, and we'll look specifically at these historic wells. Even though the data may be 25 or 30 years old, they still used valid EPA methods, and I don't think it would have given false readings. But they're not up to today's standards, and it's very difficult to validate that data. So we are planning.
It's always something, right?
I'm sorry.
No, I think it was.
I'm on mute. I'm on mute.
You're not on mute, Steve.
Oh.
I'm going to put you on mute right now.
So as you look at the excavation areas, which are in red, and the one that's over to the left, that one there.
Yep.
There has historically been, they just covered that over. There was oil in the soil, and they buried it. So something over there seems to be, in order. But I'll certainly put my comments in writing.
All right. Yeah, we'll take a look at that again. We've looked at the data. We'll go back very specifically and look at all the previous data and what was done and whether it was adequate or not, and whether we need another boring or a well in that area. It's certainly possible. I think, like we've said, none of this is the end all be all. And until we issue the phase 2 report, that we'll still be doing additional investigations.
I have a question for which you may not be able to answer. But what about the patients that were there several years ago? I mean, I know myself, I was a patient there in the emergency room, and then I was a patient there the physical therapy? How does all of this affect me?
I don't think it does, Bill. I think, you know, these things, you would not have been exposed to any of these contaminants strictly by walking in and out of the buildings and so forth. And I think, you know, we haven't gotten into it, but we as part of the radiological survey, the buildings were screened and there was nothing found in there that was beyond background. So I don't think that would have affected you at all, Bill.
Works for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have some questions in the chat. The first is from Rick. He asks, will more exploring be done on the landfill area for possible buried contaminants, drums, equipment, etc.? Any additional wells or depth assessment?
Yes. We haven't really, we just have been talking about this very recently, but we are planning to do some test pits into the top of the landfill as part of a program to sort of accelerate an understanding of and determine the feasibility of removing the landfill material. Removal of that landfill creates different opportunities for development. So we want to understand what the cost might be, what's in there. So over the next month or two, there may be some investigation that goes on out there at the landfill, is just to figure out what is in that landfill to the extent we can find out. So yes, that will be done, and there will be additional monitoring wells, both shallow and deep, installed around the perimeter of the landfill.
Okay, the next is from Karen Riley. She says Joanne Yatsuashi lived on the property for 20 plus years and her husband was chief of staff. Joanne has mentioned several times that the original lab where the radium-226 was first stored and used for testing and treatment, that building was imploded and buried right in its place. What are the plans to test for radiation in the areas where buildings used to stand?
Well, I think we've got some contradictory information on that, because I think we had a call with a gentleman who was the plant engineer there, and others have reported that the building, that there was no basement in the former old hospital building that extended out to the north here, and that it was a slab on grade, and that the wood material and everything above grade was hauled off and the concrete was broken up and buried just to the south of the nurse's residence. That's what we heard there. So we're getting some competing information, but we did spend a lot of time with Joanne and went over a lot of information about the history and you know, particularly her residence there.
Thanks, Bob. Does anybody else have any questions?
So sorry, this is Karen. So Bob, can you just clarify? So are you saying the original building where the radium was first stored and then imploded and buried, you're not going to test for radiation in that area?
Well, first the building being imploded and buried, and the radium, that being the first place it was used or stored, we really don't have any information about that. The building wasn't imploded, it was demolished, you know, controlled demolition, and all the above ground parts of it were removed from the site. The only thing that was left was the concrete foundation, and it was buried over here, just south of the nurse's residence. As part of our screening, we can go out there and do some screening and see what might be there. But right now, we just don't have any concrete evidence of where to look or what to look for. And we're hearing, you know, we've gotten conflicting reports as to what went on. So.
And Joanne's offer still stands. She's fully, you know, willing to go onto the property and, you know, walk it with you to point out, you know, where these buildings were.
Okay, well, I know, you know, we met with her and we had the plans out and she pointed out where they they were, and I assume that's still, that information is still valid unless she has additional information to provide. So we've tried to take that into account in developing our plan here. But when we get ready to do the next round, I know Andy Bakanowski has made some observations historically, and we plan on meeting with him out there if he's available. And we could have Joanne come out at the same time if that would work for her.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Not seeing any. I'm not hearing any. Oh, I spoke too soon.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, this is Joe Mulligan. I can't get the chat thing. I don't know how to do that. Sorry.
That's okay.
The
Go
wave.
ahead.
I had reviewed previously the class 2 response outcome statement that was submitted. And this goes into a lot of the stuff that Earth Tech did previously. And they mentioned a couple of things that I haven't heard. I'm not familiar with the terminology, but there's a thing called a PAH or a PA, which, as I've been able to understand, is a carcinogen, and that was above levels, and then elevated PAs, and it's a elevated PAs in the sediment near the landfill.
Yeah.
That was detected in 2000. And in addition, the LNAPL, which is the oil, correct?
Yes.
It said that it did not indicate that a condition of no significant risk to human health or environment exists for this portion of the site. So that's a double negative. So that tells me that there is that it's already been told that there's an environmental risk for that portion of the site. Can you address either one of those things?
Sure. So the term is PAH, and it stands for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon.
Mm-hmm.
And there are typically two types of PAHs that we deal with. One are the pyrogenic PAHs, which that means they originate from fire. In other words, they are generated during the burning or incomplete combustion of organic matter, specifically in this case, coal and wood. And you would find a lot of PAHs associated with coal, coal ash, wood ash. We know that this was a coal-fired facility. The coal was offloaded at the rear of the power plant. So I suspect that the PAHs that are there are associated with the coal and coal ash. If it's coal ash, there is, or coal or wood ash, there is an exemption in the regulations for those compounds because they're so widely used. There are PAHs in the soil, any place that there was ever a coal burning furnace or a wood fireplace, and the ashes have been thrown out in the yard somewhere. So those are very common compounds. Some of them are carcinogenic, but they're ubiquitous in the environment. They're everywhere. If you go inside a 128, you can't find soil that doesn't have PAHs in it. So the LNAPL, we know that that's this kind of pink oval here. We know that there's oil out there and that's going to have to be dealt with. And we're going to further assess it and then figure out what the solution is to remediate that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to expand on that for a second, this is Jesse Arroyo. I'm working with Bob on this project. That RAO that was submitted was specific to AOCs 1 and AOCs 4, that's behind the power plant. So it was more of a holistic report. It talked about all 7 of the AOCs, but the RAO portion was specific to those 2 AOCs, which they determined there was no significant risk. So they indicated that there was a significant risk associated with the other AOCs at the property, but not those 2.
And that significant risk is not just or necessarily focused on risk to human health. It also includes risk to public safety, welfare, and the environment. And in the case of NAPL, that is by default a risk to public welfare, is how it's defined in the regulations. And so it doesn't necessarily mean there's a human health risk, although I don't think anybody wants to eat or take a bath in number 6 oil. If you've ever seen this stuff, it's like molasses. But the terminology sometimes can be a little confusing and maybe mischaracterize, the situation.
Thanks, Bob and Jesse. Any other questions?
So this is Sandy again. I had one other question. So are you saying that areas of concern 1 and 4 are not going to be looked at anymore because you think they have no significant risk? Who
I
just
think
spoke?
What we're saying is that the data is dated, and it's not CAM compliant in accordance with the regulations. So we are proposing to collect some additional and more recent data from soil data specific from those areas and utilize existing monitoring wells in those areas to characterize groundwater.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Sandy.
Anybody else? I think that might be everything.
I did have one question. Just
Sure.
will this presentation, these slides be made available to us?
I think they already are available. They are available on the DEP website for download.
Okay.
There are copies, hard copies at the both Walpole and Norfolk libraries. And I believe, did we send these directly to the?
You did, yeah. Karen forwarded it along, Joe, and I uploaded them in our
Okay.
Google Drive, so
Right.
I can follow up with you on making sure you have access.
Thank you.
Sure.
And this is also being live streamed, and there will be a YouTube video online just for everyone's record. And to Bob's point about having hard copies of materials, moving forward, we're finding that it takes a lot of paper to print out a lot of the materials we are using in this process. So we just ask, and hopefully you all understand, we ask that if you would like a hard copy of anything that we submit moving forward, to please email us, and we'll be sure to send around an email once our next round of submittals is up and we're providing more material to you all. It just becomes a lot of what we feel like is a lot of paper that's being printed, a lot of trees that are being taken down to print that paper. So upon request, we're happy to print out hard copies, and we of course will leave hard copies at the library for folks to go and read. But if you would like a paper copy moving forward, just ask us and we'll make sure you get that, and digital copies will always be available.
Yeah, and we're just asking that the group, agree with that change. The regulations require us to send out hard copies unless the neighbors of Southwood agree that rather than doing that by default, it could be an opt-in process. And if you request them, we'll certainly send them out. If you don't have access to a computer, you'd rather read it that way. So it's a request on our part, and we hope that that's something you would consider.
This is Bonnie McLaughlin. We actually were talking about this last week because of the amount of paper, obviously, that we all got recently, especially with that remailing with the both volumes. So we essentially got a duplicate binder, a whole nother inch of paper. And we had discussed about, the number of folks that are on the official list of representatives is like a dozen people that we have, and we had made some discussions about how to go about that. So I think that's definitely something we can be on board with and discuss a little bit more internally. I almost wonder if because there might be a short list of folks on the team that consistently would like the hard copies and then the rest that would not. If maybe we could make that determination as a group when we meet maybe next week, and then give you the list of these are the 5 people or whatever it ends up being that truly do want the hard copy stuff each time. And then the rest can, obtain them electronically. But instead of having to do that with every issuance of material, perhaps we establish a shorter list of folks that I know consistently would want the hard copy.
That's perfect. That's exactly what we are hoping for.
Okay, yeah, we all want to save a tree. That was a little horrifying. So
I
yeah,
think there was
we're
multiple
working
trees-
on that too.
multiple trees, I think. Yeah. All
Same.
right, thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it personally, as putting together that was very time consuming.
So where
Thank
in
you,
the
Jackie.
library would be the, I was there yesterday and I asked the librarians in Norfolk, where is the repository? And they had no idea, and they didn't have any of the hard copies available yesterday either. So I'm wondering,
What time? We had dropped it off. I believe someone was there around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon to drop off the copies of the final phase 2 scope of work and also the presentation.
really, because I was there at 7 PM last night.
Okay.
And I'm sure you were there. I just don't know where, and the librarian couldn't find it, and she didn't know where the repository was of any other material either. So,
I think that's a question we'll have to pose to them. We deliver it to them. We ask them to put it in the repository. They should be familiar with the process, as there's been other PIP sites.
Right,
in Norfolk.
right.
So
I looked where the other repository is. It's in that little schoolhouse room in the back, and
Yep.
I couldn't find anything. So
I've had.
we'll just have to figure out
communications
where
with
they
the-
are.
With the library director, and she did tell me that she was going to put it in that room along with the other materials that we've provided to her previously.
All right. Well, maybe I'll go down, later this week and make sure that they're out and available. She must have them in her office or something.
She might, but I'm not sure.
And I'll double check at the Walpole Library.
And sometimes you deliver something to one person, and then the shift changes or someone else comes in and they don't know where it went. And so it may just be a miscommunication, because we know we've delivered a lot of material to them.
Do we know who it was delivered to yesterday? individual?
I don't have the names offhand right now.
Okay. Okay. Any final questions, thoughts? All right, I think we might be ready to wrap it up. Thank you all again for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to continuing to work with you, and if any questions come up, feel free to email us, but thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.